Alright, so let's try to wrap this up. The last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to this architectural shader, one of the other things that you can use it for besides glass and ceramic tiles and fine china and plastics and wood, you can use it to do metals, all kinds of different metals. But one metal in particular that you can do with this shader that looks very interesting and is very realistic is brushed metals. Okay, you notice that there's a lot of brushed metals in the real world, things like different types of aluminum and things like that. And what I mean by brushed metals is a type of metallic object that has sort of these metallic grooves that are caused by microfaceting. Okay, so now you're probably thinking, what in the world are you talking about? Well, let me show you. You'll understand in a moment. Editor, edit that out of the video, please. Start again, 3, 2, 1. So let's go ahead and let's select this this object up here. And if we go ahead and we do a render here of this object up here, this object is simply a light fixture. That's all it is. Now what I want to do is make a sort of aluminum light fixture made of brushed aluminum metal. Okay? Right now, this is what it's looking like with the Lambert shader. Now, the actual white light material here, that's being caused by the area light. If I show you here, there's an area light here. If I open up the attribute editor for it, and go down to the mental ray settings, it's set to be the shape of a disc, and it's set to also be visible, and that's why we can see it when we render this out. Okay, so the light fixture right now is just using a Lambert shader. So what we're going to do is right click, let's go to assign new material, and we'll go with MIA, here it is, MIA Material X. Okay, and let's call this one, I guess we could call it, I don't know, light fixture, for the sake of not spending more than about 20 seconds coming up with a name there for something like that. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up the diffuse and the reflection parameters here. Reflection. I want this object to be reflective and completely reflective, so I'll increase the reflectivity to 1. Now I want it to have some blurriness because brushed metals and aluminums, things like that, tend to have some kind of blurriness to the reflections. They don't look like mirrors. So I'm going to add some glossiness here. I'll add about 0.75 I'll use for the glossiness. Okay. Now since this is a metallic material, I want the reflections to behave like a metal material. So that's why we have this option here that says metal material, which is extremely useful for that. Okay. If I zoom in a bit here, tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this area light here, and I think I'm just going to hide it. I'm going to take this area light, and I'm going to hit Control H to hide it for now. And let's open up the render view, take a snapshot, and let's do a render region of this area here, just to see what we have. Okay, so there's our material so far. It's kind of shiny. Under advanced reflections, we're not going to change any parameters there, so let's go ahead and leave that alone. For the diffuse, let me go ahead and knock the color all the way up. See what I get there. Just trying to get a sort of metallic aluminum looking material. And I mean, that looks pretty decent, but it doesn't look that great. Let me take the weight, knock that back down to 0, just so this thing doesn't have any color. I need this thing to be completely reflective. But as you can see, even though it's completely reflective now, and it does have blurry, glossy reflections, still isn't looking that good. So let's go down here, and for the refraction, let's leave the refraction parameters up here alone. Editor, edit that out of the video, starting again in 3, 2, 1. So we don't want to change any of these refraction parameters, and the advanced refraction parameters, we're actually not going to mess around with those. So let's collapse that stuff. Now, for the BRDF, I'm not going to use Fresnel reflections. Instead, this time, I'm going to opt to control the way that my reflections look based on what I want. So basically, I'm going to break away from using that physical accuracy from the Fresnel reflections, and for the sake of me doing what I want to do, I'm going to control this stuff. And this will be a good opportunity to show you how some of these parameters work. Okay, so right now my 0 degree of reflection is 0.2, and that's basically the reflection that you see when you're looking at this thing head on, which is a pretty low amount. So let's increase this to about 0.6. Let's save that image, do another render region, see what we get. Okay, so you can see it's a lot more reflective now, and actually starting to look more like a metallic type of material. Kind of looks a little bit mirrorish, but that's okay because that's kind of the metal material that I'm going for. Okay, very reflective type metallic material. So I'm going to keep this type of a BRDF turned on. So basically all I did was increase the degree of reflection for the angles where I'm facing at this thing head on. Everything else I'm pretty much going to leave alone because it looks fine. Alright, so now the challenge is to get those sort of that brushed metal look on this object. Let me close that. Let me actually zoom in on this object here. I'm not sure if this is going to be the best angle, but I'll try to find the best angle possible so you can see this. Okay, so this is what this is looking like so far, which actually doesn't look too bad. It does look a bit metallic, but we want to get these nice sort of brushed metal look right here, where we can see the actual grains of the brushed metal. So how can we do that? Well, we can do that using something called Anisotropic Reflections, alright? And that's what brushed metals have. If we go over here to our parameters in Attribute Editor, we'll see that we have this section here for anisotropy. Let me collapse the BRDF there. And right now it's set to a default setting of 1. The default setting of 1 basically tells Mental Ray to turn off anisotropic reflections. So there won't be any anisotropy effects related to this object. So what I'm going to do is change the anisotropy. Okay, so the way this works is if you want to get some nice little grains in the metal, you have to go ahead and lower the anisotropy to a much lower amount. So let's go to something like 0.1, and you can see up here in the sample that it changed. If I go back to 1, I have this sort of specular shading where it's just nice and uniform. When I change the anisotropy, you'll see up there in the texture sample that the reflections get stretched out, and that's the way that these anisotropy type of materials look. If I increase it, I don't get much of an effect. I don't like to increase it past 1 because the effect isn't exactly what I'm looking for. So I'm going to go with 0.1 since that looks pretty good. Okay. Now I'm not going to worry about rotation and the channel for the moment. Instead, what I'm going to do is do a quick render region here. And now you can see, and I didn't save the before, I should have. Let me do this. Let me right click on top of the remove image button and go to remove all images. And let's go ahead and let's save this image. Okay, so right now you can see that the anisotropy is having basically no effect whatsoever. Why is that happening? How come it's not listening to me? Why is Mental Ray refusing to do what I tell it to do? That's because there's a few ways that you can do anisotropic reflections and specular shading. Okay, there's a few different methods and they all work pretty good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you one of those many methods that is going to work very well for you whenever you try to do these brushed metal type surfaces. Okay, and one of these methods requires a reflection map. Okay, one way that some guys do this is by using a bump map, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to use a reflection map. So how do you plug in a reflection map to this? Well, the reflection map works very similar to the specular maps that we've worked with before in previous chapters to this one. Okay, and you plug those maps into the reflection color. So what we're going to do is go click on this little checkerboard icon, and then we're going to go to File, and we're going to plug in an image. So let's click here on Color. Let's go get a file. And we're going to go look for a file, and the file that we're going to look for is called Anisotropic Map, and I'll open it. Okay, you can see it there in the texture sample. I'm going to hit the View button so you can see this, and you can see what's going on. Basically, whenever you want these brushed metal surfaces, like the one in this case, you want a UV map and texture your object properly. So you got to make sure that the object has correct UV coordinates. And if I go to, if I select the object, and I go over here to Window, I can go down to UV Texture Editor. bring that UV texture editor over here. A little bit difficult to see, I know. Hit A on the keyboard to frame in on everything. Click on this button up here that has these two squares, this blue and gray one, so you can see the UV map. You can also hit this button over here. Editor, edit that out of the video, made a mistake. Starting again in 3, 2, 1. You can also go over here and hit this button of this person that's grayed out to dim the background image so you can see what's going on. So here's the UV coordinates of this light fixture that I've already went ahead and UV mapped. And you have to make sure that your object is properly UV mapped like this, or however you decide to UV map it, to make sure that the brushed metal look is applied correctly. So let me close that. Let me go back to view image so you can see the image. So basically the image has these sort of grains, and you could create this image in pretty much any image editing program. Photoshop, you can use Corel Painter, you can use the GIMP, you can use a lot of software to do this. It's a very simple image of these sort of metallic grains, and you want to make sure that this thing's in a grayscale, so it's black and white. Basically, the brighter areas are going to determine where the brush metal strokes are, and the darker areas are going to determine where there's no reflectivity or no specular shading. Okay, and this brushed metal look of this image is going to transfer over in the reflection map, and it's going to make the object look like it's like it's a brushed metal surface. So let me close that. Also, I want to make sure I take this quadratic filter off, which is on by default. Just turn the filter off completely. Close that. And let's go back to the material attributes of the light fixture here, the brushed metal. Okay, so now that I have my reflection map plugged in right there, let's do render region and see what we get. Alright, so this is what I have. It's a little bit difficult to see, but if you look pretty closely, you can see that there's these sort of strokes, or this sort of grain that goes horizontally here. That's because of the reflection map. But there's another important parameter that's related to anisotropy that you have to be aware of, and that's the rotation parameter. Okay, this is a very important parameter. As you can see here up in the texture sample, my grain here, or my specular shading, is going horizontally from left to right. If you change the rotation, you can see in the texture sample up here that specular shading is actually rotating, and its angle is changing based on my rotation down here. So let's go for rotation of about 0.25, so a quarter, to basically make this thing flip and make it go up and down as opposed to left and right. So it's going to be vertical now. Let's go ahead and render that out again. Do a render region. And there we go. Basically now the shading is going up and down. You see that? It's not going sideways anymore. And that's one thing that you want to be aware of. The way that this works is, in the real world, when you have a brushed metal surface, the specular shading should always go perpendicular to the grain. So if your grain is going from left to right, your specular shading should go from top to bottom. And if your grain, or if these little brushed metal strokes in your image are going from top to bottom, if they're vertical, you want to make sure that the specular shading here is going horizontal, because that's the way it works. It works by opposites. That's just the way that it works in real life. So if you're trying to do photorealistic brushed metal surface, you need to make sure that you pay attention to this rotation parameter and also the orientation of the grain in your texture image, or else the shading is going to come out completely wrong and it's not going to look realistic. Okay, so there we go. So now we have these nice grains, and basically we've created this nice brushed metal look to our surface. Now the channel basically just changes the mode of the of these anisotropy sort of shading attributes here. Editor, edit that out of the video. Doing it again. 3, 2, 1. Now the channel parameter basically just changes the angle and the way that these that this sort of specular shading here that we've been changing and rotating around, as you can see with the rotation parameter. Basically, that channel parameter is going to change the way that this thing is interpreted. Now the default setting is -1, -1, which is just a mode. You can see here we have a mode -4. We have a mode -3, -2, -1. We go to 2, 1, and so on and so forth. You want to keep it at the default of -1 here. This mode is the default mode, and it's actually the best mode to use when you're doing this, unless you're an advanced user and you want to switch modes for whatever reason. But I recommend sticking with mode -1. Okay, so now we got these parameters set up. That pretty much is going to do it. That's our brushed metal surface. Okay, so let's close that. Let's also close the render view here. Alright, so to finish this scene off, let me actually unhide the light that I had here before. So I'll go to the hotbox, I'll go to Window, and I'll open up the outliner. You see in the outliner is a list of all the objects in my scene. Any objects that are hidden right now will have their name in blue text, in dark blue. So it might be a little bit difficult to see, but it's this one right here. So it's this light here in dark blue, which is the ceiling light. So just select it, and with it selected, hold down Shift and hit H on the keyboard to unhide it. Close that. So now our light is back. Okay, so now let's go back to the view options here for the camera viewport. Let's go to bookmarks and let's go to render 1. Okay, and next thing we probably want to do just to finish this thing off is increase all of the parameters for the objects in our scene, so this thing renders out good. Because right now, if I do a render, it renders out pretty fast, only 16 seconds. But as you can see, the quality of this is horrible. There's graininess and artifacts all over the place. This thing just looks, it's totally unacceptable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this video here, and in the next video, very quickly, we're just going to go into all the shaders that we need to, increase any parameters and quality settings we need to, increase our render settings, and just do a final render. So we'll do that in the next video, and I'll see you there.